to Project V Resurrected. I'd like to take a minute before we get into the video to remember Ozzy Osbourne. He was one of my favourite artists throughout my life, and recently, sadly, he passed away. I'd like to take a minute to just remember Ozzy for a moment. Okay, so today's video, guys, as titled below, is what is goth? What is goth? What is goth to me? It's a very good question. A lot of people ask this question. A lot of people have different answers and different ways of defining what they believe is goth. Goth is a music-based subculture. It started in the late 70s, very late 70s, early 80s, off the back of what was punk rock, off the likes of the Sex Pistols, GBH, Sham 69, etc., etc., The Clash, and other bands. Some punk bands that came along did go on to become more post-punk, more goth punk, if you will. Gothic, like gothic dark punk, like The Damned, for example. They transitioned from being a more so a punk band to being a post-punk band that had a lot more gothic elements than they did in the first couple of albums that they made. This was a transition quite a lot of punk bands made. Nevertheless, in the very late 70s, very early 80s, we had the birth of what is goth. It started out as I say, as a music-based culture, which then grew to a more stylistic culture as well as being music-based. And the style was, of course, is what we call trad goth, traditional goth, which basically meant in those days there was no such thing as fast goth fashion or anything like remotely like that. So you'd rely on going to, in the States it's called thrift stores, here it's charity shops. You'd go and you'd find anything that was black and customize it with safety pins and studs. Anything you could lay your hands on, you'd customize it and make it dark and macabre and different. And teased hair was a big thing in traditional goth, and the death hawk, which was like a mohawk, but it was more of a teased hawk. That was one of the early styles that people went with in those days, with pikes, which are like witch shoes essentially. But goth itself did again start out with the music. The core first three bands that came in existence was the Bauhaus, Susie and the Banshees, and Joy Division. One of the most notable songs of Bauhaus that a lot of early goths, and even to this day, go to is Bela Lugosi's Dead, which is quite a long track, which is a beautiful, dark, macabre sounding track that envisions everything that is the gothic subculture, essentially. Spawning from these three bands, you did have a sort of next wave, but at the same time, are bands like Specimen, bands like Sisters of Mercy that came just a little bit later, and like a second wave. The Mission, Switchblade Sympathy, and many other bands did appear within a matter of a couple of years of each other. But essentially, those three bands is where it's all originated from with the sound. Bands like The Cure came along, which I'm a big Cure fan, massive Cure fan. And with this movement came also clubs. most famously the Batcave Club in London, that was run by, I believe, was the lead singer or one of the members at least of Specimen. They'd play there quite regularly, and there'd be quite a few underground goth bands that would play there, that would essentially cut the teeth by playing there. Sadly, it shut down. I think it shut down by the late 80s, 90s. I think. Don't quote me on that. I can't remember it off by heart, I'll be honest. But those were the humble beginnings of goth. And once goth was out there, it started to make its way in more mainstream affairs, like into movies like The Crow and Gypsy 83. A lot of gothic based movies started to appear. Tim Burton, in later years after that, with Corpse Bride and Nightmare Before Christmas, very gothic, very dark, very macabre. The Addams Family was, something else that was very big in the culture. And also Elvira. I've never been really much of an Elvira fan, but she did have a big impact on the gothic subculture through the years. So, with all that being said, we know where it's come from. It came from the late 70s, early 80s. That's the origins of the idea of goth, sorry. That was the origin. That's where it came from. As time has progressed, goth grew into different things. It grew into dark wave, which is another style of music within goth. Then there's goth rock, and there's EBM, which is more like techno electro style music that is got more of a macabre twist to it, with more of a macabre sounding vocals over the top. And also over time, there's been different styles of dress, really. From those humble beginnings of trad goth, we've delved into, over the years, Victorian goth, cyber goth, just to name a few. And it really took on something of a new beast, of a new era, really. As time's gone on, there has become more different festivals and gatherings to do with goth and the subculture, such as Wave Gothic Treffen, Maraluna, Whitby Goth Weekend, Tomorrow's Ghost Festival. All these festivals started to appear over the years. I think Whitby might have been one of the earlier festivals for the Gothic subculture to have appeared. But it is a wonderful, wonderful thing to behold. If you've ever seen any of the footage from these festivals, it looks super, super cool. Super, super cool. And the way I see goth, the way I view goth, to me, is I don't always dress goth myself. As you've seen in my other channel with Zoe, I'm not always goth. I don't always dress goth. I don't define myself as goth. I love the subculture. I love a lot of goth music. I love a lot of goth style. But I don't consider myself goth. I consider myself as more alternative. But I do enjoy dressing this way quite a lot sometimes. So, for me, goth is, it is more of something I enjoy. It's not necessarily my lifestyle. But I do think what goth truly is, it's what you feel. It's creativity. It's, if you feel it in here, then that's what you are. You don't need someone to tell you or to label you as anything. to be a goth. That's if you want to be a goth, you can be. You don't have to even actually dress that way to be a goth. You know, to me, it's more of a way of life. It's more of who you are. You don't necessarily need to be listening to Bauhaus 24/7. You don't necessarily need to be going into a graveyard and sitting with the dead. Well, that's really awesome and cool. You don't necessarily need to do that. You don't necessarily need to drive a hearse everywhere or any of those things. Goth is more of a way of life. And I'd also like to say, in my opinion, goth isn't just the music. For me, goth is also the fashion. Without the fashion, maybe there isn't the music. Without the music, there isn't the fashion. But that doesn't mean it's the be all and end all, because it's not. To me, the fashion is all, in the humble beginnings, and it's over the years that have passed. It's been, an important thing to the culture, because as they always say, if you got the presentation, then that you won half the battle. And a lot of these early bands had such a macabre, such a enticing presentation that you'd be interested before you'd listen to the band. For me, it's been a mixture of both in my life. I got so fascinated by the styles and by the music too at the same time. But that's up to interpretation. Whatever you feel, you are. Whatever you feel fits you, then that's what fits you. I don't really believe myself in the idea of baby bats and aldegoths and stuff like that. Like, we all have to learn somewhere. We all discover it at some point. So, it doesn't matter whether you're on the internet now and you're searching goth bands for the first time in your life. You just maybe heard The Cure for the first time and you're like, oh, this is really awesome. This is absolutely amazing. I love it. That doesn't mean, that you're any different than, say, someone that's been a goth for 40 years. Just because you're at different paces, just because you're at different ends of the spectrum, doesn't mean that you're any different from each other. In fact, I don't believe in any sort of gatekeeping, which I've heard happens. I've not experienced it myself personally, but it does happen, which is unfortunate, because we shouldn't be gatekeeping not just the gothic subculture, but gatekeeping anything. The idea is to learn. The idea is to pass on the knowledge. For if we don't pass the knowledge on of, I think in this case the gothic subculture, how will it ever continue and grow? How will we ever learn? How will the culture survive if we don't pass it on? If we, and it's things like that. It's always something that I always wonder when I hear people say that they've had these bad experiences. It just doesn't make an ounce of sense to me whatsoever to do that, but some people do. That's just a brief overview of what I think goth is and where obviously goth came from. I do have another video coming out soon with a special guest. None other than Zoe from my other channel. She is coming on this channel to make another guest appearance. And it is going to be, the video is a part of this whole gothic set of videos I'm going to be making. I'm going to be covering multiple things within goth itself. This is just really an overview. I'm going to go more into detail on different bands, different different styles and all kinds of things. Zoe will be the first guest into this series, but I may have another guest coming soon as well. But we'll see on that one. That might take a bit more time. But I hope you're all well, and I hope you're looking after each other. Stay safe, and I shall see you in the next one. Bye.